Hello, hello, hello to everybody tuning in, listening, or watching us, or doing both. Like, why wouldn't you want to do both, right?
Right.
Welcome to the Melanin and Moonlight podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tyrell Collins.
And I'm Vernon Scott. Hello, friend. How are you doing?
Doing good. How you doing, friend?
Doing good, doing good. I will say there's a possible slump coming up, but who
Mm,
knows? But
right.
it is a wonderful sunny day.
Mhm.
It's supposed to be spring, but it feels like summer. But
Summer.
here we are. How's your weekend been treating you?
It's been good. It's been good. Like I had a light week, so I'm glad about that. We in spring, so weather is changing. It's getting a little bit more warmer, so like I definitely need to cool down. I'm trying to remain in a positive mood because anybody who knows me knows that I'm more irritable as we get towards summer because I don't like being hot. I don't like being overheated and hot. So I'm gonna try my best to remain in as positive mood as I can.
I'm
No
rooting for
promises,
you.
but we're gonna try.
I am rooting for you and your success there. I will make no promises on that. I'm going to be irritable. I'm going to be an asshole for many of reasons. So let me
This is
stop.
why we provide a good balance. At least I try. Vernon, y'all, he's just like, no, it's not gonna happen for me.
It's
So
not.
you get at least a balance. You get like a try, and it's just not gonna happen.
I'm not going outside. I don't, like somebody recently was talking about how because they thought I was going on multiple trips this summer, and I was like, I don't know who told you that lie. Like I had one summer plan. But that ended up being switched like further on. I'm like, who told you I travel in the summertime? We don't do that. There's nothing but heat. No.
Yep. Yep.
But anyways, what's been on your radar, good sir?
Oh yeah. So I have been really thinking about one certain conversations that have been really taking place around like 90s late or 80s early 90s childhood stars, especially our black childhood stars, and just their experiences, like when they are giving like interviews or reflections. Like a lot of people are coming out with their memoirs now, so a lot of stories that a lot of childhood actors have that are now being brought to light are really interesting. And I also think that some of the ways in which like they think, it's not to take away from their experience, because we can never do that, but kind of like this distortion of reality that they have as well. And so really wanted to have a interesting conversation about the nature of Jaleel White's memoir last year, Growing Up Urkel, which obviously, if you're familiar with Jaleel White, was the main star, Steve Urkel, on the classic show Family Matters. So he came out with his memoir last year, I believe around December.
Hmm.
Had a lot of interesting reveals, and I guess like the one thing that I wanted to point out in regards to him was, of course, again, giving due kudos to him. I loved how he talked about encounters that, he's had with a lot of, now we can consider obviously controversial celebrities like R. Kelly and Bill Cosby, and just encounters that he's had that has felt off to him, not in a inappropriate way, but like behavior sort of way. So like he reflected on like Bill Cosby being like, of course, an idol and a mentor and things like that. And of course, despite the things that have happened with Bill Cosby, right? We cannot deny what he's given to entertainment. That's just
Hmm.
like undeniable. But Jaleel White did speak on in his memoir about like when Family Matters was over. He tried to like pitch an idea to Cosby that he really did wasn't really receptive to. So it kind of felt like while he was a teen, while Jaleel was this teen idol, and things like that, it's kind of like, oh, he was always part of like that inner circle. But as the classic saga goes, when you're not, you kind of like are kind of like a second place thought, or like your ideas are not as thought about. He also brought up like an incident involving R. Kelly where like he invited him like to play basketball or something like that, and I don't know, R. Kelly just seemed like to have like a very like strange like entourage of people around him, like was taking like the game like really, really seriously. So it was kind of like just off putting in a lot of ways. So it's just nice to, like regardless whether or not you want to 100% believe these stories or not, because again, these come from, this person's perspective. It's just nice to hear, people's experiences, but also get to understand like certain nuances of like certain behavior that it's like, oh yeah, okay, now that I look back on that, there's a reason why that felt, why that felt weird or that felt, out of place or, just things like that. So I just, I really commend him for, what he did with coming out with his memoir. Now, he was also in the news for comments that he made that I'm like, okay, you said what you said. You offered an apology for it, but really want to get, your take on this, Vernon. Like, so he was doing an interview where he discussed how like Family Matters was often overlooked. He feels in discussions about influential black sitcoms, like suggesting that shows like Martin and Living Single like received more acclaim because they were perceived as more authentically black or hood. So he minced his words there and he did come out and apologize about the way that he framed the conversation, because he framed it as like, it wasn't meant to be like disparaging or anything like that, but what he was essentially trying to say and what sparked controversy was that when you have a show like that was featuring a black family created by a white producer, right, you have this broader, more mainstream audience. And so, with having that, sometimes the cultural aspect or the cultural depth that's found in some other black sitcoms of that era often get overlooked. And so, again, he came out, apologized for it. But I just really thought that, even though you can apologize for something, because of course nobody is perfect, we all mince words, of course, or whatever,
Mhm.
like you made the comment for a reason, right? So to me, it was this whole thing about, I don't know, it's just this whole black cultural gatekeeping. I don't, I want to say like just this very, because obviously, as we know, Family Matters was very massively popular over for like nearly obviously a decade.
Mhm.
And I think like the idea that he's been denied his flowers kind of like overlooks the way he became a household name. So I just want to get like, obviously, what's your take on that? Just even obviously you want to comment on the whole like aspect of like things he talked about, maybe like, or maybe brought up in his memoir, or just even specifically about like the comment he made about like certain black shows being more acclaimed because they were more hood.
Mhm. So, well, we definitely cannot use the word hood, especially on Living Single, because ain't nothing hood about
No,
that show. We
no.
have a lawyer, fashion designer, creator of a black magazine. So we have people in prominent roles. So we cannot even consider that a hood show. And even with Martin, not hood. They may have, well, they lived in what would be considered New York at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So it wasn't necessarily
Chicago.
Chicago. What? Yeah.
Detroit.
So it
Mhm.
wasn't necessarily in the hood, but probably in the black neighborhood. But there's a
Right.
difference. But anyways, that's not the point I want to make. I feel like it was one of those comments that came out of his own hurt of hearing people not necessarily liking the direction that the show went into. Because
Mhm.
if we think about Family Matters, it is something that people within the black community talk about very often in terms of we love that show, but we also recognize that as the show
Mhm.
progressed, it it's was not as heavily black centered in terms of the storytelling,
Right.
and it just became the Urkel show.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
even when I go back and rewatch Family Matters, which I rarely do, but I've done it, I stop after season one because like, I know what's coming up
For a
afterward.
nine, well, for a 9, 10 season show, you stop after
I
season one.
do. Like it's very. I will say Steve Urkel. When I was a child, I enjoyed seeing intelligent black kid, but I
Mhm.
also had smart guy.
Right,
And
yeah,
that was even more enjoyable than
exactly.
Steve Urkel.
Right,
And
yeah,
it's not necessarily because I didn't rock with the show or anything. It was because it was just more entertaining in the sense that when it came to comedy,
yeah,
comedy was all the way around. When it came
exactly.
about to like real life things that happened in in the story, it was there, but Steve Urkel, well, Family Matters, I need to call it by the actual name of the show, but Family
Right,
Matters, it just became a show about the hijinks of Steve Urkel and not the family that was originally centered
right,
around. Like
right.
we start the series off by learning that what's Laura's mama name? Dang it. Um, well, her mama, her aunt, of course, is living in their home. Grandma,
Mhm.
husband just recently passed away, and she's, moving in with the family and everything, and that they're making that adjustment with having everybody here, having auntie, having this baby, and all this others, all these adjustments happening, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
they're just moving along, trying to figure out their life. Of course, having Steve Urkel being intertwined in this. I think it came more like later on in the show too, which was even better. Like it wasn't an immediate, oh, this hijinks is here.
Hmm.
But like we got a feel of all of what a family may go through as
Right.
they adjust in having something that's blended. And I'm not talking about like blended in terms of stepchildren and all that, but just blended generationally.
Generation. Right.
Like we have multiple generations in this household and also siblings who are adults in this household too.
Right.
And adults who have kids and raising those together. It's a community feel, but as the show progresses, you lose that community.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it's like you cannot be upset for people not connecting with that show as much when the community itself leaves because the community was in the household. Right.
Right.
I know one of my favorite episodes are I can't even say favorite episodes. One of the episodes that comes back to me the most is that episode where um what is the dad's name?
Oh,
Jesus,
Carl.
not
Oh, Carl.
Carl Winslow. There we go.
Hmm.
When Carl had to um speak up for his son because he was being profiled.
Oh, yeah.
So he
Because yeah,
had
that's a very powerful episode. Yeah.
like he had to confront his own coworkers about their own internalized racism, and after he had vouched for them and did not see them as being
Hmm.
racist because he saw better in policing to the point that he just was not living in the reality of what his job may bring.
Right.
And even the episode, why am I keep forgetting the parents' names?
Oh, Carl
Anyways,
and Harry.
Harriet.
Hmm.
There we go. When Harriet was applying for that job,
Yeah.
right? She didn't get hired because they were trying to say she did not have the qualifications to do it, but it was because she was a black woman. Like
Hmm.
all of
Yeah.
these things, they were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, but you could run the elevator."
And
Well,
that's the thing. And I think that that's the thing about a show like Family Matters. Their most prevalent episodes are the ones that don't center on Steve, or center on the comedy really aspect. And it's not to say, because I don't want it to sound like, oh, every episode of a comedy needs to have
hmm
something that is innately like humane. Yes, of course we want that, or something that's serious. Yes, of course we may want that, but it is to say like shows can also be balanced as well. So immediately, like if you have wait, because like you just said, if I have to think about Family Matters, the episodes that is exactly that stand out to my head is like what you said when Carl has to stand up for Eddie when he's
Hmm.
been racially profiled. Another episode that stands out to me, not the fact that the one with Harriet doesn't do that, but I think about when Laura got bullied by the gang, but by
Oh
the gang
yes,
of girls, and they had a whole gun
that's a good
centered
one.
episode.
That's a
Like,
good one.
and it's not to say that you need to have something that is innately a heavy topic with every episode or anything like that, but it is to say that you have to think about what draws audience to a show, which is the nature of Steve as a character, but what is the thing that people remember the most
Hmm.
about the show? And so I think that that comment initially, I think that innately he felt that being Urkel kind of like overshadowed him, and which he has spoken about even previous times. And he's had to grapple, I think, with not being seen as cool or culturally black enough by peers, despite mainstream fame. And so there's this distortion that I think comes with this identity tension of when you're outside of that space, to where it's like, okay, I'm on this hit show, I'm a teen icon, things like that. It's like I'm loved everywhere, but not feeling fully claimed, almost like really by your own people as well.
Hmm.
So I think that just the nature of that is interesting. Like I said, he ended up making an apology about the hood comment.
Hmm.
And it's not to say that that wasn't like real or whatever, but I just when people make certain statements, I always feel like there's some sort of truth to why they said what they said.
Hmm.
You know,
And I wonder if that maybe have came from just, the narratives that we feed ourselves.
yeah.
Him telling himself that, oh, the reason, or somebody told him this, the reason why the show is not doing so well is because people are focusing on more of the hood things.
Hmm.
And rather than, because, he was young,
Yeah,
very young when the
exactly.
show was airing and
Exactly.
whatnot. So if someone told him that, hey, it's a challenge to get viewership on here because this, that, and the third, I will see why someone young will believe that and internalize that and think that the reason why my show wasn't doing so good, me being the star of it now,
Hmm.
is because they prefer the hood character
Yeah.
versus the intelligent black kid, which again, we have smart guy.
Right,
Smart guy
exactly.
was doing
Yeah.
very,
So
very well.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like we as much as we like to, and I think we're in a more of a space to accept this now because times are different. Back then it's kind of like especially as we were growing up, people really felt like there is only room enough for one of us at
Hmm.
this table. So it's kind of like if I am portraying the black nerdy or kind of like smart, main character, we don't have room for another type of character, with that in this space, even though you can create it, because we need more nuanced, portrayals. And so, yeah, I just really thought that that was interesting. The one thing I do want to call, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to call Jaleel out on for it.
Ooh.
I don't technically know if this is true because it's not like I know these people personally, but I love me, the actress Bianca Lawson. I've always loved her from, the nature of Save the Last Dance to, of course, her role on Queen Sugar, her role on Kendra as Buffy. So, like I've always been a Bianca Lawson stan. Now, the one thing I did not appreciate Jaleel kind of alluding to was that Bianca being a kind of clout chaser in a sort. So, like, not only was that just not was
Wait,
like, yeah,
Chase Nova, who's Cloud?
exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Like, really, Jaleel? Like, let's not state things that are just inaccurate. Okay, Bianca has had decades of steady work, often with more relevance than you. So don't have statements where that's like competitive ego. That's not based in truth. Like, let's not do that.
Listen, when I saw her on Buffy, I was like, oh my God, yes.
Yeah, it's like,
Bring
let's not
Kendra
do that.
back.
Yeah,
We
I'm
don't
like,
care about you,
don't do
Buffy.
that. Like, don't
Don't
do
do
that.
that. Don't do that.
Don't do that. But somebody else that has been doing a lot of conversation though in interviews recently, and there's a lot of things that have been revealed, and I can't wait for her memoir to come out eventually when it does. Of course, I've always been a Raven-Symoné fan.
Hmm.
So, so the fact that I'm not liking the fact that, she's been doing all these interviews with her wife, like her wife is attached to her hip. It's kind of like that reminiscent of like Monique and her husband, being like her husband being attached to her hip anytime she speaks about something. So I don't like that whole thing. But what I do love is that, Raven is we know she is a blueprint for childhood fame. For somebody that started acting at the age of 3, being on the Cosbys, then moving into hanging with Mr. Cooper, all these commercials, Dr. Doolittle, both Dr. Doolittles, then moving into her own show in That's a Raven, and just the movie she's
Yes.
been in, Cheetah Girl, all these things. Raven is a blueprint for childhood, acting. So what's been really interesting to hear from her is these aspects of, one, I'm loving how she is being more vocal about obviously things that were done behind the scenes, not necessarily with the show, with the show That's a Raven, but things that are just not okay. So she has alluded to the fact that she had to undergo like a liposuction and like a breast reduction, because of course, like it was made to seem like she was more physically mature. So the idea that, she needed to, in some ways, kind of like have that to, have success. Obviously very, very traumatic. And now we consider conversations like that to be physical and emotional abuse, right? So, like those kind of things obviously would not fly today. But just hearing her speak about, some of those things that, have taken a toll, like on her mental health, kind of growing up. But the one thing I did want to, of course, point out is something that I'm like, just like kind of like how Jaleel has this kind of distortion. I think with certain things she does as well, because she made a claim in an article at some point. This was a little ways back. She made a claim in an article saying that boys tuned in to That's So Raven to like look at her breasts, not because of the comedy. And when she made that comment, I was like, what?
Yeah. Like,
So
how would you know?
basically, exactly. So it's kind of like the thing that she was saying was that obviously That's a Raven was, of course, a Disney Channel show aimed at, preteen, kind of age. Obviously, slapstick comedy, teen misadventure, psychic visions. I mean, like, obviously, that's the heart of the show. And so, this idea, I felt like this idea that she had that boys tuned in for her body reads more kind of like, I don't know, like because when she made the statement, I'm like, like where did she get like that reality from? Unless it's just people that was maybe like behind the scenes with her, or maybe like people like just in the studio audience. I don't even know.
Hmm.
But it, to me, it kind of read more as like internalized sexualization, where she was forced to confront certain things from behind the scenes that projected out onto the public. So it's, to
Hmm.
me, it was like obviously she's been objectified in private. And to me, like obviously aspects of that pain have stuck. So she's like misattributed to audience. Now, it's not to say that it's completely untrue. Like, no, of course, multiple things can be true. She may have obviously had audience or boys at, a preteen age that, looked at her for her body or, whatever. I just know, speaking for myself as a viewer and for friends that I grew up with, when we would come in talking about, Disney and, Raven and stuff, it's like we view Raven as like big sis. Like, like that's how she was so much of a household name, excuse me, that it's like, no, we weren't looking at Raven in like a sexualization kind of aspect. We looked at Raven as like, yeah, that's like big sis. Like you would consider Raven to be a part of your family.
Hmm.
So I just thought that that was a interesting thing that she kind of brought up from one of her interviews. So what is like your kind of like your thoughts about like that kind of distortion that happens with that?
So, well, before we get into the distortion part, I will say I was one of those people who was watching the show because I thought she was beautiful, but I
Of
also watched it
course,
for other things because
of course.
she was fine.
She was. Of
I
course
would
she
not
was.
say I was sexualizing her though, but like, I did notice that she had breasts. but that wasn't the reason I watched.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, absolutely. No, I mean, no,
No,
anybody with eyes can obviously see. Raven has always been
she was
a
gorgeous.
gorgeous
That's
girl,
gorgeous.
and things like
Uh,
that. So no, it's not to dismiss that at all.
but
But to say like that's the reason why people tuned into the show, like, nah.
yeah, I would say, yeah, that might have been one of those other things, like you said, either internalized sexism or even someone told her that. And
Probably so.
she just internalized that as well, which is kind of interesting concept or interesting thing to even bring to a teenager's attention because she was a teen during that show. I think she was in her t early 20s when she did Cheetah Girls though, but
Probably
she
so,
was
yeah.
definitely a teenager during that So Raven.
Yeah.
But like even because my first thought was if this came from an adult to her, I'm like, so it's giving, we recognize that this show is drawing adult eyes and we're rationalizing the adult eyes by saying that they're here for to, sexualize her body, which may be true, but also may not be because the show was great. Like it's a family-friendly show that
Yeah.
adults enjoyed watching for innocent purposes as
Yeah.
well as the age group of people who it was for. It's just a really good show. Like
Yeah.
her family, everybody that was there, it's funny people.
Yeah.
So
Way to go. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like in talking about this again, it's not like I know these, like we know these people personally,
Mhm.
so it's not like we live in their shoes or live their lives. And so I think it's really one of those things like how do we, not just talking about these people from a stardom aspect, but even how we feel like in our own personal lives where we may have like a experience or maybe even a falsehood of something. And
Hmm.
I think it's to speak on the nature of recognizing what distortions reveal. And I think
Hmm.
it's like one of those things where sometimes the distortion says more than the fact, right? So Raven's memory, no matter if it's true or if it's false about being sexualized at a particular age by viewers, or Jaleel's kind of like resentment in a way from like that comment that he made that like I say he apologized for. It's almost it's not necessarily a lie, right? But
Hmm.
it's more like a kind of trauma flag, and I
Hmm.
hate to throw around the word like trauma, that's why I'm trying to think of it in a more kind of like nuanced way. Like it's almost like how we throw out red flags. It's like a trauma flag. It's
Hmm.
like because of these experiences, you know, or the things that have been told, this is now the way that I perceive, this is the way that I
Hmm.
perceive this. Again, regardless if there's obviously merit and there's truth to it, that's the way that it's perceived, and you can't take that away. So with these stars, as they come up with this legacy, the legacy is meant to, I think, bring some anxiety when it comes to certain things, but not necessarily to erase their experiences as well.
Hmm. And I think a lot of a determining factor of where this viewpoint may have come from
Mhm.
can be seen for the behind the motivation of her getting the breast reduction, right? If
Mhm.
it was because I don't know if that was her experiencing some insecurity because of a comment made like that, and because that made her feel sexualized, she did something in order to make her, I guess, seem less sexy or less appealing to that
Mhm.
crowd of people, because body dysmorphia is a thing.
Yeah.
So that can be a component there, or even if it was suggested to her
Yeah,
that,
no, yeah, definitely,
no.
definitely, yeah, yeah. She has definitely shared that the reason I think surrounding around the breast reduction was because it was suggested to her by adults around her. I think including her own father at the time that to conform to certain industry standards and to secure roles, this is what like she had to do. So definitely, definitely.
And so, yeah, even with that tidbit of information, I can see why she would think that people tune in just because she had big breasts,
Hmm.
right? Because if you're telling me in order for me to get a certain role, in order for me to play a certain part, I have to have this certain reduction, I have to have
Hmm.
less of a chest,
Hmm.
um, so that I can, be seen as a real actor.
Mhm.
versus be seen because I'm giving sex appeal. I can
Right.
see how that can easily form that thought process that, oh, the only reason why this happened for me is because of these things. The only reason why I got that job on whatever other movies that she's been in outside of
Mhm.
Cheetah Girl. Wasn't it? Sorry, I was thinking of so many movies that she's been in.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's just
Yeah.
so hard to narrow it
Yeah,
down.
no, absolutely.
But like, with all these roles, how someone can just think, oh, it's because of my sex appeal, or it's
Mhm.
because of these breasts that I'm standing here in this room able to perform these things, when it's not. It's because you're just a phenomenal actress. You're a
Yeah, absolutely.
phenomenal actor who's kept a job. She's like the original, well, for our generation, the original Kiki Palmer.
Yeah. Yes,
Raven keeps a
absolutely.
job.
Exactly. So yeah, it's and so I think yeah, just with this whole kind of conversation, and this leads perfectly into like I think a segment to our next topic is I think both Jaleel White and Raven, like they both are in spaces where they try to reclaim control over their own mythology of
Hmm.
their experiences, and I think that that's powerful. And in doing so, they show us. I think, but in doing so, they show us also how fame can distort reality sometimes, and how painful experiences can bend memory, right? And so it's how does being a how being a child star doesn't stop, I think, like the adult version of you from still searching for a semblance of peace as well, because you've had all these experiences to happen before you were even the age of 18 years old. And so it's like, how do you even reconcile with a history like that? So I think that
Hmm.
that's an important thing for all of us to, I think about, even from our own experiences, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah,
Um,
and I think that yeah, this actually blends perfectly into, like I say, another topic we wanted to talk about regarding child actors. Particularly, this conversation is about again, reconciling with the past. And so what we've been thinking about is how a lot of, especially 90s shows, have been having like a lot of podcasts that have been like cast rewatching episodes, giving commentary on it. And it's especially interesting to hear and watch people speak on things that, of course, they did while they were children, but now because they're adults, it's kind of like not necessarily seeing error of ways, because of course, like, all they're doing is doing their job, but seeing things that now we have always been problematic, but we're just now, like, we're in an age and a time we're seeing it's problematic. So one particular instance I think about is the actor Mark-Paul Gosselaar. And so if you know him currently, he plays Sir on the hit show Found with Shanola Hampton. Very, very wonderful show. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. Um, but if you were previously acquainted with him, you know him as Zach Morris in Saved by the Bell. And so, what I love about Mark is I love the fact that he takes ownership about things that were not right in the past. So he has done very candid interviews where he has spoken about Zach wearing a Native American garb, feather headdress, having very stereotypical dialogue when it came to like a school presentation in one of those episodes where he's like, no, like, this was inappropriate, it was offensive, embarrassing, and uncomfortable. And he's another star where it's like he was a hit, main star of, a show where it's like there's so many things that, he probably did over the course of film that he doesn't even really obviously probably remember. But I do like the fact that he is not in a place of deflecting blame or making excuses. He's pointing out that there was a lot of lack of cultural awareness
mhm.
in the writers' room. And despite certain things that, they got right and certain things that they got wrong, it's like how actors of a certain era rarely have agency to challenge problematic material. And so I like the fact that, even though that's not anything of his fault, he's just a teen star, a young adult star doing his job. But
Hmm.
I like the fact that he does take ownership in saying that, yeah, there's some things that are problematic, or even as our girl, Danielle Fishel, Topanga from Boy Meets World. She recently spoke about a episode on the Boy Meets World podcast, the Pod Meets World, I think it's called. And she spoke about a controversial storyline where, in their one of their later seasons, when Topanga was sexually harassed by a college professor.
Yeah.
But the emotional weight of the episode focuses on Corey's reaction, how he feels, how he wants to defend her, and how he ultimately, comes out looking like the protector or the hero. And Danielle, she has publicly said, she's like, yes, I understand like the show is Boy Meets World. It's about the boy learning a lesson. But she's like, now that she's older and she's able to, reflect on those times, she's like, yeah, the framing of that episode is just off. This violation should have centered on Topanga's voice, her
Mhm.
autonomy, her trauma, not Corey's sense of helplessness and anger about it. So, she just thinks that, certain, she's not saying obviously, in these statements when they're made, they're not saying that these are bad episodes, mind you. They're just saying that when looking back on it, it reflects a broader problem that, yes, you can have a show that centers on boy learns lesson storyline, but why does that need to become the central focus, especially for a storyline like in this episode where this young woman was sexually harassed, and yet we take the focus away from her? So I just think that that's interesting, from Mark's point of view, from Danielle's point of view, about when you look back and you kind of like have to reckon with the past of things that you have been a part of. So like, what's your thoughts about that?
I think it's a great thing. I feel well, I want more stars to really go back and really do that recap of
Mhm.
where they were during those times, what not necessarily what's problematic and what's not problematic, but
Mhm.
just acknowledging that
Yeah.
this here in the times that we were in seemed to be okay. Where I'm at now is just not. And just speak on that. And it's one of those things. It's like it reminds me of the reason why I don't go back and delete old things on
Mhm.
Instagram or Twitter. I don't have Twitter on my phone anymore. But like Facebook, all those things, because there was a part of myself in that age that found that to be okay. And
Yep.
sometimes it's okay for you to be reminded of, yes, sir, that was not okay. I'm glad that I grew from that. It is okay to acknowledge where we failed in the past because we're not going to be perfect people. We're not going to um like please everybody. We're not going to make everybody happy. It's just going to be impossible. But for us to just take accountability, mention that, yeah, that decision was a poor decision for me to make. But I was doing my job. This was the script that
Yeah.
they gave me. I acted on it and performed my role. Looking
Yeah.
back at it, not so great. Like even with Boy Meets World, there's a lot that we can say about that show, especially how Corey Matthews is a horrible friend, which I plan on really going deep into, not today, but I,
Mhm.
I plan on doing probably a TikTok series, whatever. It's called Off the Laugh Track. Like I have planned out about really exploring a lot of how a lot of the TV shows that we watched as kids, young adults, especially a lot of the shows in the 90s, where there were serious things going on in the family or serious um, things that we're not connecting because we have a laugh track in the background to make it
Mhm.
seem as though it's funny when it's
Right.
really not. Like even
Exactly.
when it comes to that episode, I don't remember in detail, but I'm quite certain there would have been moments where there was a laugh track there when a real serious
Mhm.
thing that's going on,
Right.
it will just detract from the story, which
Right.
honestly I feel like may have made it easier for the cast to do the episode without even thinking about how it really impacts Topanga as a character, as a
Right.
person, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And and this is and because when we think about these stars, I how you mentioned earlier about like Kiki Palmer, of course, Kiki Palmer has gone on record to speak about like the nature of being on True Jackson VP. I mean, like being sexualized at a young age and the pressure to seem mature, in a, just to protect herself in a male dominated space.
Hmm.
I remember like there was a candid interview that Tia and Tamara Mori did when when we as an audience we learned about the reason why they straightened their hair when it came to the third and the fourth season, I believe. They said the reason why the net that was a decision that was made by the network about blackness was constantly policed, like how their hair went from curly to straight because it was an attempt to make them seem sexier
Oh.
as they got older. So, and it's not to say like obviously they weren't beautiful with straight hair or curly hair. The whole hair thing is like that. The hair thing is really not the point. It was about the
Hmm.
reasoning for it. So the fact that we want to take these identical twins who are have this curly hair, they're sweet, they're innocent looking, and then as we move the show further along, they feel like for the natural development of their characters, for them to be sexualized in a way that
Hmm.
now their hair needs to be straightened. So when we think about these aspects, or even when we think about like how like Kyla Pratt has gone on record to say like from the Proud Family to 101, like she's been very fortunate that she had support and not everyone does.
Hmm.
So when you are, especially when you are young, black person or person of color growing up in an industry that is already exploitative when it comes to child actors to begin with. But then when you add, race on top of that, it's like, oh yeah, you can truly be in situations where you are discarded, left unsupported, pathologized, all these type of things. So it is to say it makes great, I think it makes for great conversation when you do have actors, white, black, pink, or purple, when you have actors like Danielle or you have actors like Mark who do go on record and they're speaking about like accountability without having to move into like the whole like cancel culture conversation. Like,
Hmm.
you can't cancel people. All people can do is really reflect on their experiences, talk about them honestly like they have. And again, that's not to mean that they were responsible for it. They're actors doing a job, especially being young actors doing a job. But
Hmm.
it is to say it is nice to see when they can come into an awareness and a power that it's like, yeah, no, yeah, I did this back in the day, like, not really, too copacetic and not too right, and
Yeah.
it's like we can reflect and we can have learning lessons on it. And I feel like most of the time, and let me know how you feel about this. I think with a lot of especially 90s and early 2000 sitcoms, where it's like you want to tackle issues, but often like kind of do it a little bit clumsily where
Hmm.
things are a lot of times heteronormative, they're really male centered, they're colorblind in a way. But to me, the reason why especially 90s and 2000s sitcoms, where it's like the reason why they still resonate though is because often these kind of issues are clumsily held. So there's also a element of truth in it. So
Hmm.
as we talk about, yeah, that episode of Boy Meets World should have been Topanga, focused, which it definitely should. I think it also showcases a truth though. Like a lot of times when men hear something that has happened to their girlfriends or whatever, it does get pointed towards them and their
Hmm.
reactions and what they do. So even though it doesn't serve the storytelling, it does serve an element of truth. And so I find a lot of times when I don't know about this for you, but I do find a lot of times when I am going back and watching 90s and 2000s like sitcoms and things like that, yeah, we can talk about the patriarchy and just all these type of things that, happen that yeah, ain't always the best. And especially with the age that we live in now, but there is an element of truth to it, which is
Hmm.
why it's told authentically or as authentic as it can be.
I would say. It's a lot of it is just a message of the time
Yeah,
because they recognize how they cannot be, not necessarily with the Boy Meets World situation, but just in
right,
general, how a lot of the writers recognize that they cannot be completely upfront with certain messages.
right.
So you have to do the underhanded way of putting it out there as best as they can. It's like with the wrong side of the tracks conversation. Like whenever you have
Mhm,
a a teen drama that has a kid
right.
from the wrong side of the tracks, oftentimes that kid was supposed to be somebody's black.
Mhm,
But
right.
because of the time that we were in, they often just changed that to trailer park and that person,
Mhm,
you know, still kind of gang affiliated and all this other stuff, but it drove home the message of the kid from the wrong side of town can actually is not necessarily a bad kid.
yeah,
They have a space for redemption is usually something going on in the home, and even the kids on the right side of the track don't have the most perfect families, right?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
you get all of that, but it's just not the lack of pushing the boundary and just being straight up front with
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is what today thrives in a little
Mhm.
bit more than what we had back in the day.
Yeah,
And the artistry suffered
exactly.
somewhat for that.
Exactly. That's right, because it does become a double-edged sword with like there are obviously a lot of things we watched growing up that would not just it would not go over well today. We can't, and that's how they say, you can't, unring, you can't unring a bell. Like we can't go back in time. And that's why I love the 90s and 2000 shows because I can look at them, I can still laugh at some things. Yeah, some of the things obviously there's a lot of homophobic jokes and things like that, but I can still look at it and appreciate it for what it is,
Hmm.
and still say, like, yeah, if I was watching this today, I probably wouldn't necessarily have the same kind of reaction to it. But I can appreciate things for what they are. And so I think we get into this conversation about good intentions, but sometimes harmful executions of things. So but again, I just really appreciate how people like Danielle Fisher and Mark Gosselaar and like your Kiki Palmers and Ravens and Jaleel White's. Like, I love the fact that we are having our time where our stars that we grew up with as children are now finally having that space to voice not just what their experiences are, but giving us insight into their perspectives of the truth. And now, because we're in a time where we are seeing more nuanced things that are coming through, with television and, with movies and things like that, it just shows us about how much progression, yeah, in certain aspects we have made. And so, of course, how much more we still need to do, which I think is always the prevailing conversation, So, you know, honesty, let us love the art, but we continue to interrogate the industry. So,
Uh, Sometimes I miss the life of being naive because I remember seeing Raven on TV and thinking, "Oh, she's just an adorable baby." And then a few years later, she's on TV a little bit older and all this other stuff. Now we have that so Raven, and after a while, I realized, "Oh wait, this person's older than me." Like, this person has been on so many of these different shows, and it's because of how, the replay and syndication is,
mhm,
you're thinking that this person is growing up with you as they're
mhm,
going on in their careers and whatnot. Just
yeah.
realize, wait, no, she got me by a good 6 years
Yeah, yeah,
or so.
especially,
Probably
yeah.
not that
Yeah,
much,
and
but
that's another conversation to have like another day. Like when you find out the ages that, people have played, even if you do like look younger, like the fact that you had like 30-year-olds playing teenage, it's like, really, what are we doing?
right.
You know.
No, like
Uh,
another conversation
that's a
that
whole other conversation.
it's just the creepiness of Hollywood and how they used to use like early 20-year-olds
Hmm.
for certain roles so that they can do things that's a little bit sexually
Right.
inappropriate.
Exactly.
Again, that's a conversation for
That's a
another
yeah,
day, but
well
we
yeah,
need
we'll definitely have that conversation. We'll save that for another day. But
but
yeah, so yeah, what was the last thing that you wanted to bring up for tonight?
so for me, I wanted to talk about depression a little bit. Of course, I started the episode talking about I feel a slump coming on. Actually, after this weekend, I've been doing a lot of Star Wars related stuff, and I finally caught up on Demon Slayer. I feel so much better. Slump still may happen, but. I was having a conversation with a friend and I was letting him know like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I do feel that, approaching. And his first thought was like, oh no, don't say that. Don't
Mm,
wish that on yourself. Like it's a bad, blah, blah, blah. And mind you, this is not a friend who's um let's say a resident visitor, a regular visitor to a therapist. I do encourage it because I encourage all my friends to go ahead and talk to the lady. But even with that, I recognize his capabilities of related to emotional intelligence is not necessarily the same as mine, so I don't judge him for not knowing what I know.
right.
So um I wanted to bring up the conversation of embracing your depression because
Mhm,
oftentimes, especially within the Black community, because we those who are in it understand how we approach therapy in general. Not to say that this doesn't exist in outside cultures as well, but this podcast is about Blackness.
right.
Um, so because of that, a lot of people within the community see depression as just being the ultimate bad thing.
Mhm,
It's expressing that you feeling depressed means that you're suicidal, which is not the case either.
exactly.
So I wanted to just talk about how it is beneficial for us to actually take the time to really embrace our depression whenever we do feel an episode coming on.
Mhm,
Like, I know this is a bad trait, so nobody copy this. I've gotten to a point where I can schedule the days of when I want to be depressed, like
mhm,
especially if I'm going through survival mode and I just need to make it through, meaning I have this project due, that project due, homework, work-related things, having to get these hours, pay these bills, blah, 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 blah. There were weekends where I would be like, okay, I'm going to be off that weekend. I don't want to plan anything for that day or the day after that. I'm going to turn off my phones. I'm going to stay away from these things and I'm going to give myself the chance and the permission to be depressed,
mhm,
right? Don't recommend it, but if that's how you have to make it through, feel free to take that. But
mhm,
that is my way of embracing that depression when it comes on, because most people think that if you just automatically ignore it and sweep it on the rug or
mhm,
distract yourself away from it, that is not going to impact you.
mhm,
That's not the case. Sometimes, yeah, you can push through a couple of days longer or maybe even a month. But at the end of the day, that depression is going to come back, right? You
mhm,
don't want your depression to build up so much that now you are feeling a little bit suicidal with it as well,
mhm,
right? You want to experience it, allow it to process its way through you, so that you're not sitting in that depression for forever. Like
mhm,
even when it comes to like some of my clients who are just getting in that process of understanding how their depression works for them, I let them know you can give yourself a day, right?
mhm.
You can give yourself a couple of hours. The only thing that you have to remember is that you don't have to give your depression your entire life. You do not
Exactly.
have to give your depression a month, a year, or anything like that. You can choose when you want to bring your normal back. So how much
Mhm.
time do you want to give yourself? So wanted to start that conversation and see what some of your thoughts were.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it's also to make, obviously, if anyone is not aware, to make us all aware that, depression is also not just associated with melancholy or sadness. Like some of the most prevalent stories we hear about, unfortunately, for people who take their own life, is that they were riding on a high, of a high state of a mood.
Hmm.
So, just unlearning the nature of depression doesn't just look one way. You could be experiencing any type of emotion and still have feelings of depression. So that's really number one. But yeah, I think saying I'm depressed isn't a weakness. To me, the way that saying I'm depressed, it's like reading, it's like bodily autonomy. It's like reading data.
Mm,
It's naming what's going on inside your body, your brain, your nervous system. So, and it's also for me, I think, a way of refusing to gaslight myself into pretending that, oh, I'm just tired, or I just want to be lazy, or, these kind of things. Like, no, I feel heavy right now,
hmm.
but that doesn't break me. It makes me honest.
Okay.
Like, so acknowledging, that feeling is not a weakness. And, like you said, depression is often has that message of grief. It's, loss, or it's exhaustion, or, I can't deal with life right now. And of course, I mean, we've all had moments where we can't deal with life. Of
Because
course,
life be lifing.
life be lifing, absolutely. But embracing it means saying that it means asking ourselves, okay, what needs to be grieved? What needs rest? How can I actually restore my mindset to think about this? So I'm just going to bring up a example of myself. I probably know that I will go through some element of depression in a few months when I move out on my own for the first time. And even though it won't be the first time that I have lived out on my own, knowing that I've always been like very close to like family, there's going to be feelings of isolation. Even though I'm pretty much a loner, I don't mind being alone,
Hmm.
but just the nature of that safety net, that's a loss that I have to go through and experience. And an experience, no, that does not mean that I am going to have it impacting my day to day or even my hour to hour, but acknowledging the fact that, yeah, I am probably going to go through some elements of loss. I'm going to go through some elements of distortion. I'm
Hmm.
going to be grieving a life that now, yes, is exciting. I'm moving into a new phase of my life, but it's also mourning an old phase of my life that has been a big part of my identity. So just bringing up that example for me. But it is to say that I think conversations around depression, kind of center on what society tells us. You
Hmm.
know, society tells us that depression means, or not necessarily what depression means, but we live in a society where it's like, oh, if something's wrong with you, you need to fix it right away. And knowing that when we're dealing with our emotional health, that is not a quick fix.
Hmm.
We can do things to make sure that, yes, it doesn't have us to fall, completely off edge. But when we need to feel how we feel. And like you may mention earlier, sometimes like I just need to be in a funk for a while. That doesn't mean that I'm going to allow my mind state to go to a dangerous place, but it's like when you got real problems going on, it's like sometimes you do just need to be in a funk for a while.
Hmm.
And now the key is not staying in that funk, but you definitely need to feel it. You have to give yourself permission to slow down, knowing that, healing or going through your process, it's not going to be linear. It's not to say that, oh, okay, this thing happened. I'm going to be depressed tomorrow and I'm going to get right back up the next day and continue on. No,
Hmm.
it's like life doesn't work like that. Feelings don't work like that. So we have to get into, I think, as a community, even if we don't necessarily know what to say, to another person, just saying that, you know, I hear you. I'm here to support you in whatever you need to. But it's like, do not dismiss when somebody is saying that they are depressed.
Exactly.
So oh, that gets under my skin when we just shrug depression, just like, oh, like they'll be all right.
Yeah, one of the things that I encourage people to do, especially if somebody that they know is, let them know that they are depressed. Like you said, don't automatically push that away. But additionally, like you said, how can I support you? ask them those questions. If they don't recognize what they need, ask them last time that you was in this same funk that you're in, what were some things that helped? And is that something that I can bring to you? Is that something that I can help you with? Is there a way that I can be a better friend in this moment for you? Or do you just want your space to deal with this alone? And respect whatever that answer is, because that's them telling you exactly what they need, right?
Exactly.
And another thing I wanted to briefly highlight too is when you mentioned grieving. Um, Grief is one of those things that I would say being a therapist helped me see how grief can be there for a lot of different things outside of death, right?
Yeah.
Um, you can have grief in moving to a new location,
Yeah.
moving away from family, moving to a different house in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
All of these things can bring grief. And I feel like something that really does keep a lot of people stuck is grieving their past selves, or not
Mhm.
giving themselves the space to move away from who they used to be, which is why we have a lot of adults acting a certain way and not moving into maturity, because they don't many adults are afraid of seeing or embracing who that new version of themselves can be.
Yeah.
And they're not willing to detach themselves from that and feel those real emotions that come with aging, that comes with letting that past version self of ourselves go, so that we can really enjoy this new version,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
To enjoy what it means to be a 30-year-old today, enjoy what it means to be 40, 50, 60, 80 years old today, and
Yeah.
what beauties come along with having
Mhm.
all those experiences, rather than um not saying I felt any guilt towards spending a lot of my 20s partying or whatever, which I say early 20s I did a lot of that.
Mhm.
But I don't see myself doing those same things in my 30s, because I want new
Mhm.
experiences that may not have been allowed available to me in my 20s, or may have been available to me in my 20s, but I just didn't have the opportunity to do it because I didn't have the setup that I needed, right? Embracing this new version of myself that's here where I need it to be, where I can manage or do a little bit more that past version of myself couldn't do.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to put myself on a restrain myself from embracing what new opportunities I have just
Yeah.
by being at this adult age.
Right.
I hope I don't do that, because I can't guarantee 40-year-old Vern right now, but I hope that in 10 years, in 15 years, I'm still open and willing to do that for myself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I just think that to talk about dealing with our emotions healthily, depression or any other emotions, is not to wallow, but it's to witness yourself fully,
Hmm.
without rushing, without hiding, without shame. To me, it says, even in the darkest times, I am still worthy of care. I don't have to perform joy to be lovable. And that's not giving, like, just because I'm experiencing something, that doesn't mean that I'm giving up. That just means I'm just telling raw honesty. This is the state that I'm in right now, and that's in it innately of itself is healing. The
Hmm.
fact that I can acknowledge that and don't have to dismiss it. Because as we know, the first step to, as we talk about the grieving process of getting to acceptance, is you have to acknowledge it first.
Hmm.
You have to acknowledge that, no, I'm not okay right now.
Exactly.
So definitely, definitely.
Yep. Anything else you'd like to share before we close everything out?
No, I think that was it. I loved how, we y'all we always connect in our topics, you know how we do. You know how we do. So I love the fact that we were, able to, talk about, aspects of celeb life, of, past childhood stars that are now reconciling with the past, and tie that to a very prevalent mental health topic. Because I think that these topics, they flow together really seamlessly, in speaking about what it means to reconcile a past, and knowing how to deal with certain, with particular emotions in a healthy way, so that they don't manifest in ways that are toxic, or the ways that are detrimental to us. And no matter if you are a celebrity, if you are just regular day-to-day person, these are all lessons we take away.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
All right, well, audience, y'all do the things that y'all need to do. Take care of yourselves. Please own your emotions. Please acknowledge those things because they're going to be there. Like I've mentioned on a previous episode, allow yourself to break because come on.
mm,
Keeping all of that stuff in is not going to do anything for you. It's not. Release it. Create space for happiness, okay? Like, I know that that phrasing is very, very popular on the internet, creating space and all that. But for real, make room for happier memories, joy, and all those positive emotions that you want to feel. But you have to
exactly.
make sure that you deal with those negative ones first. Well,
Mhm.
technically, if if you ask me, no emotion is negative or positive. We can experience them in any kind of way, and they have whatever reactions they have. But allow yourself to engage with those so that you can release them and again open some new room for new experiences to take hold.
Absolutely.
But with that said, thank you all so much for tuning in to Melanin and Moonlight, your late night space for deep, thought-provoking conversations about sex, culture, and the well-being of the Black community. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep the vibes flowing and your minds open. Bye, y'all.
Bye.